Well, Merry Christmas and good morning. Welcome to Faith on Hill's online Christmas Sunday service. We gather together every Sunday at 10:30 a.m., both online and in person. But of course, this Sunday is Christmas Sunday, so we are gathering together in person for a family service. For my shortest sermon of the year, we're going to sing Christmas songs together and celebrate the birth of our Savior as a church family. Now, tonight at 6 p.m., super important, you are invited to an in-person only Christmas carol and communion service. That means there's no online version of it. You can only be there in person. And part of it is just that it's so music heavy. We have found that even churches that have the highest quality production values, the music's not terribly engaging online. And I've talked to people who work on the video and the online content for massive megachurches, and they'll tell you that they look at their metrics and they can see that when the sermon is over and the band comes back on, the people watching it nosedives. People do not engage with church music online the way they do in person. And so tomorrow night at 6 p.m., we are having our Christmas carol. Oh, I should say it. And so tonight at 6 p.m., we are having our Christmas carol and communion service here at our building on Hill Road, and we would love to see you there. Now, this morning, going to do our shortest sermon of the year. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to Isaiah chapter 9. And then next Sunday, the Sunday in between Christmas and New Year's, we are going to meet here at the building in person for a church breakfast. We'll still have an online service, but it won't be with breakfast because there's no way to simulate breakfast online. So next Sunday morning, instead of our normal church service, like we've done the last couple years, we will have a breakfast service in the fellowship hall, and so you are welcome to attend. I'll be flipping pancakes. It'll be a good time. So that's next Sunday morning, 10:30 a.m. We will have our breakfast service. Tonight at 6 p.m. here at the building on Hill Road, we are going to have our Christmas carols and communion service. And right now, we're going to turn to Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah chapter 9, starting in verse 1, says, "Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan." The he who is being spoken of is none other than God himself. Zebulun and Naphtali, these northern tribes, humbled over the years, losing their places of prominence. If you remember, as we studied the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, they had been sort of the driving, leading tribes in Israel until King David came on the scene, and then they lost their place of prominence. And then the northern kingdom of Israel, after Israel separated into two kingdoms. You see, there was King David, then his son Solomon. After King Solomon, the nation split in two, the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. And these northern tribes, Naphtali and Zebulun, were some of the first to be conquered and driven out, and they've been humbled. But in the future, God will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. How? How was Galilee honored? Well, we, of course, know, looking backwards, that Messiah, Jesus, God himself, came and began his public ministry there in Galilee, referred to as Galilee of the nations because at that time it was overrun. At that time it was filled not with the people of God, but filled with invaders. But there was going to come a time when God was going to do a work again. And in verse 2, it says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder." So what the prophet is saying is there is coming a time when people who are walking in darkness, living in blindness will see a light. And there will be a time of rejoicing. If you lived in a subsistence farming, agrarian type society, when are you most likely to rejoice? It's when the harvest came in, because you know now that you will have enough food to eat for the rest of the year. You never know from year to year, will you have enough? But for now, you know, at least for this next season, you have enough. When do you rejoice the most? At the beginning or the end of the battle? You rejoice at the end when you have won. And it is that sort of victory, that sort of finality, that is the rejoicing that the coming of the light brings. Verse 4, for as in the days of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressors. This speaks and hits harder, I think, for us because we just finished a study of the book of Judges, and we know that Midian was one of the oppressors of Israel, that during their rebellion, as God lifted his hand of protection over the nation of Israel, and he allowed their enemies to come in, and he said, fine, you want to serve their gods? Then I will let their gods defend you. And God removed his hand of protection over the nation, and some of the oppressors that came in were the Midianites. But then, in the day of their defeat, the rod of their oppression was shattered. So we're speaking of rejoicing. We're speaking of oppression being shattered. And verse 5, every warrior's boot used in battle, every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, fuel for the fire. So this is saying not only is the light coming to cast out the darkness, not only is there rejoicing at the finality of it, it's not rejoicing at something coming, it's rejoicing at the finality of it, at the harvest's end, at the end of the battle. Not only will oppression be removed, but it's final. The warriors' tools and uniforms will be burned, no longer needed. When we were victorious in World War II, we mothballed some of our weapons because we had more than we needed, but we didn't destroy them right away. We mothballed them. Why? Because we might need them again. We staged tanks and artillery and extra uniforms and extra ammunition and extra supplies. The idea was, we aren't at war now, but we might be again. The plan was that if the Soviets crossed that line and came from east into west, that we could fly the troops in to where there were pre-staged, pre-positioned weapons of war. Oh, we're at peace now, but we might not be in the future, so we better be ready. But here, the weapons of war, the tools of war, are not being mothballed, they're not being staged, they're not being prepared for a future battle. It's final. It's permanent. And the reason is given here in verse 6, for unto us a child is born. For unto us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. The coming of a child is not what you would first think of as the solution to world conflict. The coming of a child, a son being given, is not what you would think of as the answer for world peace. If you get people in a room, and you could think of different people, right? You could think of scholars, people who are historians. You understand the causes of conflict. You understand the reasons that strong men rise up. You understand the reasons that people look to invade another people or oppress another group. You understand the reasons that two nations that are the closest trading partners and have all of these connections and ties, and then they go to war. And get them in the room and say, what's the solution to conflict? What is the most obvious answer to world peace? Maybe you get philosophers in a room. Maybe you get influencers in a room. You get politicians in the room. What is the solution? I guarantee none of them will say, we need a child to be born. We need the government to be on this child's shoulders. None of them would look to this solution. The light that came into the world was this child. Jesus Christ, born in obscurity, into poverty, into rejection. We've talked about this on previous Christmases. Why was there no room at the inn? Why was there no family to take them in? They had to go to Bethlehem, to the town of their historical family home. Are you telling me that they didn't have a cousin, an uncle, a distant relative, somebody who could have taken them in? But you see, like we talked about a few weeks ago, Joseph chose to take Mary as his wife, and he chose to take the social stigma and social shame. I'm not saying that that was right. I'm not saying that's how it should be. It's just how it was. But he chose to take all of that. And Mary, hearing the word of the Lord and hearing what God had planned for her, chose to keep the child and chose to do what God said, even though all of that shame and stigma was heaped on her unfairly, unjustly, undeservedly. But they were rejected, shunned by their own family. No one was there with them. They were on their own. And it was in this rejection and poverty and obscurity, a light came forward. It was from this background that Messiah, Savior of the world, came. It was in this part of Israel that had been forgotten, looked over, seen as a backwater, as unimportant, all of the actions happening here, and that time has passed. And God says, no, I'm going to do something cool right there. I have plans. The child will be born and the government will be placed on his shoulders. And somebody might say, well, we haven't seen that yet. We will. All throughout the Bible, there's what's called partial and full fulfillment. When Jesus came the first time, he fulfilled partially the coming of the Messiah. When he comes again, he will fully fulfill all of the prophecies concerning the Messiah. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of his greatness and his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness. And from that time on and forever, the zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. We live in dark days. We do. We live in dark days. We live in divided days. We live in days of contention. We live in days of, half of America thinks the other half is evil. The other half of America thinks that half is morally degenerate. Everybody thinks everybody else is against them. People talk about fighting. People talk about warfare. And here is this promise of war coming to an end. This promise of peace, this promise of light, this promise of hope, this promise of an end to oppression, this promise of freedom, this promise of celebration. And it all begins from our human perspective in this birth, as this baby is born in Bethlehem. And nobody else noticed. Can you imagine there were people living in Bethlehem whenever it was Jesus was born? Almost certainly not December 25th. Doesn't matter. It's just the day we've decided to remember it. But on the day Jesus was born, there were people living in Bethlehem who had no idea that one of the greatest, most important single events in human history had happened in their town at that very day. That the promise of peace and righteousness with no end began its fulfillment in that place and in that time. We live in a world, in a moment, in a place, in a time where we have already seen, looking back, the partial fulfillment of these things. Jesus was born. Jesus came. Jesus lived among people. Jesus died willingly. Although he had never sinned, he died in the place of all sinners so that he could take the justice that my sin and your sin and our sin deserved. And he rose from the dead 3 days later, seen by over 500 eyewitnesses. And about 40 days after that, he ascended to heaven. And there is the promise that he will return. And when he does return, we will see the full fulfillment of these things, the greatness of his government and peace. There will be no end. The burning of the weapons of war, light shining and casting out the darkness, the abuse of people, of children that's done in the dark will be no more. The corruption will be no more. The powerful oppressing the weak will be no more. We wait in hope for these things, but we also rejoice and believe in what Jesus has already accomplished. We rejoice as those at the harvest. We rejoice as those at the end of the battle because Jesus has already achieved the victory. His death was sufficient. His resurrection proved all that he had done. And now we just await the full fulfillment of these things. And so as we gather together this Christmas Sunday, as we gather together for Christmas family gatherings this week, we rejoice. We rejoice because Jesus, God himself, cared enough about you and me to enter into the mess that is our world so that he could begin the process of making things right. And he has begun that process in my life. I trust and pray he's begun that process in your life. And if you say, I don't know if he has, this is the perfect time to cry out to God and say, God, show me what that means for Jesus to change my life. Show me what that means for darkness to be cast out and light to shine in my life. And God hears that prayer. God hears the prayer. And Jesus came looking for the lost. He came looking for those who were blind, roaming in darkness, couldn't see. And he brought the light of his love, his truth, and his hope to all of us. And that is what we celebrate this Christmas, every Christmas, this Sunday, and every Sunday. God bless you. I hope you have a fantastic, Merry Christmas. Hey, Merry Christmas once again. Thanks for being with us this Sunday. We hope to see you tonight at 6 p.m. for our Christmas carols and communion service. And then next Sunday, the Sunday after Christmas, as we gather together for our breakfast service. And so cannot wait to celebrate with you. We hope that your Christmas is fantastic. We know that Christmas can be hard for many people. There are those who don't have family with them. There are those who can't be around other family, and it can be really hard. And we want you to know that we are with you. We're praying for you, and if there's anything that we can do for you, let us know. If you need anything, even at this late date, if you need anything, let us know so that our church can be part of supporting you this Christmas. We've already been blessed. The Lord has put certain families in our path that we were able to help and support this Christmas season. And that comes from the giving of our church family. And I want to say thank you to anyone and everyone who has supported the work that God is doing here at Faith on Hill this year. And want to let you know, these are some of the ways that the money is spent around here. It's not just keeping the lights on and paying for the internet so we can upload these online content, but that it's also supporting directly people, our neighbors in our community who are in need. And so thank you for your support, and God bless you. Merry Christmas. Cannot wait to see you next Sunday.